So my name is Catherine Owens and I'm an Evidence and Evaluation Advisor for the Organisational Development and International Standards Faculty at the College of Policing. And that is as technical, hopefully, as this presentation will get. So I am aware that not everyone is police here and not everyone equally is an academic. So if I'm losing anyone at any point, just sort of wave your hand slowly so you don't have to embarrass yourself by putting your hand up and going, I don't understand. And I will try and explain the acronym or the issue. I will admit now that I do not know that much about domestic abuse. My area is, when I did this, was evaluating technology. And so actually my role is more about understanding how technology causes transformational change in the police service. And in this context, it just so happens to have been in domestic abuse. So please don't ask me a technical domestic abuse question or have sympathy with me if I do not get things perfectly right. So what did we do? Well, why? Why bother testing body-worn video at all? As we have heard, lots of people feel very strongly that it is a very, very effective tool. And it makes common sense, right? You know, you record something, provides extra evidence, why bother? And indeed, why bother at all in some contexts? And in this context, I'm going to talk about Essex. The reason that they wanted to is that they'd had three, this is Essex Police Force, which is a county force just on the outskirts of London in the southeast of England. They'd had three high-profile domestic abuse homicides. So three women had had police contact in the same year, and after that they had unfortunately died or had been murdered by their partners. And in each of those instances, Essex Police had been criticised and they'd said, well, you officers had contact with these women, your officers failed to notice, you should change your process. Is Zoe in the room? No. Yes, perfect. HMIC had criticised them about their response and they felt that they needed to do something, just as I was mentioning, innovation. They wanted to try something different to change the way that they were responding to domestic abuse instances. They had a really high volume of calls as well as those high profile instances. They were receiving between 85 and 95 calls a day and they were finding that just the volume very difficult to deal with, and they were looking for a way to reduce the demand that Zoe talked about. And in just the same way as we've heard in other places, they actually wanted to take an evidence-based approach. So because they had promising evidence from other areas that body-worn video might work, they wanted to actually test if it worked in Essex. So the theory of change, so why would it work, essentially is that it was going to give greater support to victims and witnesses. It was going to act almost like an independent witness, a record of what happened during the incident. It was hopefully going to increase the number of, and I'll translate this for non-policey people, action in court. So something was going to happen, someone was going to get arrested, something was then going to be taken to court in a way that previously it might not have happened, and that then they were going to plead guilty and they were going to get a prison sentence. They also felt, the officers themselves, that it was going to provide more accountability. In those other instances, no one really knew, although because one of the witnesses was dead, they only had the police account for what happened, what that person had told them, the notes that were taken at the time, the evidence that was available for them to have been able to spot any signs of risk. So actually, there was a suggestion that it would improve officer confidence, that they themselves would feel there was more of a chance that there was going to be a conviction, and they themselves would open and be welcoming the opportunity to actually show their approach to dealing with domestic abuse. And finally, and this one's a little bit tangential, I'm not sure if this was aspirational, but they actually thought that it was going to reduce offending behaviour at the scenes. They thought it was going to calm everyone down, that they would turn up and everyone would think, I'm being recorded, so I'm no longer going to be angry, I'm not going to assault a police officer, I'm going to behave now. Okay, so what did we do? So we took all of the response officers in Essex, about 308, and we randomly assigned them to either be wearing cameras or not. They had 80 cameras from a previous purchase that they'd made, so they were existing kit. And then we took those officers, we spread the cameras out across all of Essex, so the 80 were chosen from all across, randomly, obviously, allocated. So that was stratified by sample, just means that we made sure that there was a spread across all the different locations in Essex. The deployments were blind, so the place where the calls are taken to allocate jobs, they didn't know, or they shouldn't have known, which officers were wearing cameras and which officers weren't, so they couldn't help the evaluation along by sending them to any particular cases. Equally, they should have had a single crewing policy, so that meant that one officer only attends an incident, so it's easy to see if that officer was wearing a camera or not, so each incident should only have been body-worn video or not, and the focus was on the incident. So actually, if more than one officer did turn up, it was body-worn video present? If so, that was a body-worn video case. If it wasn't, it was a non-body-worn video case. So we looked at the proportion of those instances where someone turned up wearing a camera, and we said, how many proportion of arrests do you get compared to those instances where nobody turned up with a camera? And how many then charges do you get as a proportion of those two groups? Just a simple comparison of those two groups. So, trial launched, lots of exciting incidents happened. 4 months later, we got a difference. So we didn't find a difference at all in the arrest rate, and I'm sure at the time they would have appeared somewhere horrifically in Zoe's chart, because actually the arrest rate was really high. So officers, because they'd been burned, did not want to take a risk of not taking positive action, and so almost every instant they were arresting someone because they thought, I do not want to be the person that did not arrest, because actually if I take positive action no one can criticise me, whereas if I leave and do nothing then actually that's going to happen. So those officers were arresting. We did not see a difference, because if you get an almost 100% arrest rate, there is nothing to compare it to. You're not going to see an increase. The difference in charges, we saw an increase in the proportion of sanction detections that were charges. So they weren't any more that were entering there weren't any more cases detected, but of those cases that were detected, they were more likely to have charges. So actually, instead of a caution, which would have been a detection, someone said there was guilt, instead of a caution, they were getting a charge. So you could get a more serious outcome, but critically, in this instance, you're then more likely, and in fact that is the only route, to get to court. So you're more likely then to get a different outcome. I don't know whether that's a better outcome or a worse outcome. That is the outcome that was the aim of the trial. So where do we find that difference? Well, actually, we looked at absolutely everything. Was there a difference geographically? Was there a difference with officers? Because in all of these instances, you get lots and lots of anecdotes. So old officers don't know how to use technology. They won't know how to do it. Actually, we didn't find that. Oh, it's really different in the city. Well, actually, we didn't find that. Oh, well, actually, people who've been in service for ages won't change their behaviour. Well, we didn't find that. So actually, there was absolutely no difference between if it was a man or a woman, or they were long in service, or they had a different age group. They all behaved the same. There was exactly the same shift in charge rate, regardless of the geographical area or the demographics of the officer. The only difference that we found, which again links to this arrest rate, when a call comes in to someone phones up and says a domestic abuse incident is happening, please can you allocate an officer, they're graded in 3 different ways. It's a standard, a medium, or a high risk incident. So for all high risk incidents, actually for charges, 99% of them are getting charges in Essex. So we are not going to see an improvement in those instances. They were already very effective at getting charges through for very high risk incidents. So the biggest difference that was being made was in the lowest grade of risk, which is actually standard. You can see that's a larger difference between those two. And actually, it's probably in those cases where the evidence, there might not be a visible injury, or there might be a relatively minor in the scale of domestic abuse incident, and it was there where you were seeing the increase, because that had the largest potential for increase, and perhaps that's where the extra evidence was able to push it over the edge from something that might have been a caution into a charge. Sounds wonderful. Yes. But officer feedback was that there was definitely more quantity and quality of evidence available. They were pleased with that. They had really mixed views about supporting victims and witnesses. So for some of them, they thought that it was the best thing possible, because they were finally able to give those victims and witnesses extra evidence, extra support to take something to court. Some of them felt it was an ethical issue that they were filming. Sometimes the victim was not really understanding the implications of being filmed at the time. Sometimes they were really distressed. Sometimes they'd had head injury and they might not be, or sometimes they were children and they felt then at a later point, they said, well, thanks for that. You say now you don't want to continue with this prosecution. We've got body-worn video evidence. We're going to carry on anyway. And they found that for some officers a little bit difficult. They said that they felt that it was not what the victim wanted and they felt unhappy continuing to record in those instances. They also sometimes reported unhappy filming when somebody said, turn it off. It was a difficult challenge for them, which is interesting because they don't mind writing down what happened and they don't mind taking photographs, and but it's, I guess, an extra bit of intrusion when you're filming somebody. And equally, there are some issues about different cultures not wanting to be recorded, and they've tried now having other ways where they put the camera down, face down, and only do audio recording. The accountability they felt was considerable. So because of those, I believe, because of those deaths, they felt that if it was them, that they were the last person to have seen somebody and they were recorded, that actually somebody, the hindsight police, would come and scrutinise them, would come and review that footage and come and say, well, actually, it was obvious that there were children in the home. Didn't you notice the toy on the floor? You can see it in the camera, but you might not be able to see it. But they, in some cases, they actually welcomed that because they preferred the protection that it offered as a voice for a view of what they'd seen and done. And it also did, for the officers, they did strongly believe that it was going to make a difference, and they believed that it was going to become more efficient. However, a picture paints 1,000 words, but a video paints 1,000,000, and if your picture is blurry, the cameras themselves were awful, really, really bad. They filmed the ceiling quite often. If it rained, if their television was on, the audio was bad. If they had blurry, they'd often knock it. It was awful. Like, honestly, the footage was so bad. You'd sometimes get it back and it would be a blue screen. And so quite a lot of the time, the officers just stopped using it because they said that the actual kit they got was so bad. I have to say that as a result of the trial, Kent and Essex, as a joint project, then bought new equipment because actually they were able to show a difference, and that enabled a funding decision. And good on them for trying with old kit, because you've got to test it some way, and it's better to get out there and test it in somehow rather than try and. But yeah, that undermined the officers' confidence in using it again. And actually, it means it's not just the piece of kit; it's the whole back end. And equally, I know we're not going to talk about CPS, but some of the issues about then what happens later can then go on to undermine an officer's confidence, because if they feel that they've recorded something and then it isn't used, then that can lead to quite a vicious cycle. Equally, it raises the victim's expectation that something might happen, that they've been filmed, and if it isn't used, that can also be a problem. So, conclusions. Body-worn video can be effective at increasing the proportion of detections that are criminal charges. We had very strong implementation feedback about great evidence capture when it worked. There was some officer behaviour change in terms of an awareness of filming, but there are obviously strong practical limitations that led to significantly lower usage than you'd really want. And actually, that's the question: if they were using it in such low rates then, what difference would it have made if they actually had used it all the time? I don't know. Worse, better, who knows? We still are yet to see a difference in the later criminal justice stages. I've just got a data sharing agreement with the Ministry of Justice to actually see what happened later, 1 year, 2 years later, what's happened with those cases. Because actually we did see an increase in charges. Are they stronger charges? Who knows? But that was certainly a lot of opportunities. And the final thing I'll say is there were a lot of unintended consequences. So, for example, officers could look at their own footage back almost by default, as they were having to burn the DVD, they were watching their own behaviour back, and it enabled an opportunity for reflective practice. That, I think, is it from me. Thank you ever so much.